His hand closed around his neck as he woke up choking. He twisted to the side, leaned over the edge of the bed while he felt as if his stomach was inverting itself in an attempt to empty its contents. With his eyes wide open and his shirt drenched in sweat which made it stick to his torso, he remained in that position, trying to catch his breath and force down the terrible feeling from his insides. His stomach kept turning, a sour taste entered his mouth. With an open mouth which felt like it had been wiped dry, he sucked in air, hoping it would keep him from vomiting. Part of him expected a pink light to flare up any seconds and brighten up the pitch-black room, and a hand to be placed on his back to calm him down. But he was alone, and he couldn't see, and he could barely breathe. His hand wandered across the wooden floor next to the bed. The tips of his fingers felt the dry and uneven texture, searching hectically. Finally he grasped a glass and emptied it in one go. Slowly his body began to calm down. He could breathe. He could swallow. His insides didn't escape his body. He opened the window and let some of the freezing wet air in. It was still raining, and he held out his shaking hand. Strange. Never before did he feel sick or trembled without any emotional reason. Sicknesses couldn't hurt him, but he woke up from a dreamless sleep, so it had to be a bodily reason. After a short moment of airing the room, he closed the window, and goosebumps all over his skin could fade. With a clear mind, he noticed he didn't feel hot like one should when sweating this much, but he was cold, icy cold. Taking both his and Avery's blanket, he wrapped himself up. 10 minutes of laying awake later, he rolled over to the wall on his left and hid himself in the corner in which another pillow was stuffed. He slowly began to feel the warmth, pulled the second blanket over his head, and closed his eyes. Maybe Josephine's sickness had caught him for some reason. Maybe he grew less resistant to it with age. During the last shift from the day before, he had already noticed a shortage of air, and his meal had been left unfinished due to his intestines rumbling. Dew sighed into the cloth, burying his nose into it. It carried a faint scent of roses. It didn't take long to fall back asleep afterwards. Dew dreamt of the forest, and even after he woke up, the smell of grass and dirt was still vividly in his nose. Then he noticed that it must have been the blanket as well. He was still feeling unwell. It was as if a knot was in his throat. He felt his intestines move, and his shirt was still as wet as before. It took him a while to get out of bed and into new clothes. His step was a little unsteady when he walked down the stairs. As he reached his workplace, he realized he had forgotten to put his used clothes away. Already the attempt to keep the room tidy had failed. Josephine was understandably absent, but so was Sean. With only himself, Tiana, and Dew in the workplace, Frederick showed signs of panic in sight of all that had to be done. Apparently Sean had called a cold as well, so Frederick explained. Maybe it was the same sort the other sick cook had. The throwing up on her part, which she did not have, could be explained by other reasons, explained Frederick without further explanation, but the other two could guess. Dew wondered how Josephine would manage to take care of that specific reason, with her husband living in a barrack in the city and her being employed as a cook in the castle. Sean's wife, who apparently caught wind of the sparse employee situation, joined them during the midday preparations. Frederick disliked how the woman basically overtook his job as a chef. Her main job wasn't to work at the stove. The tone in which she commanded the three of them reminded you of Tiana, but with more of a respectable authority. After all, she did manage most of the organization in daily tasks for both lowly servants and even the royal advisors themselves. In the end, everything was prepared in time, and Dew was sent to push a tiny cart filled with the appetizer plates to the formally dressed men, which could bring them over to the table manually. Dew spotted the octopi on a plate next to a bowl of salad nobody was going to even touch as usual. The area in which the 5 visitors of the day, plus Princess and King, were to eat wasn't a dark feasting hall, but the place where they would normally enjoy their meal. Several large rooms, some displaying statues, paintings, and other sets of sofas with tables before a tapestry displaying a mythological scene, with doors equally as large, were seamlessly connecting to one another. None of the doors were locked, so Dew could hear the lively chatter of a female voice before he even entered the first room. Because they were on the second floor, the arched windows towards the patio made it possible to look directly at the castle gates. He rubbed his aching head and then forced himself to look somewhat steady while stopping the cart 2 rooms before where the actual table was placed. Two men immediately got to work and didn't spend another second looking at the blonde-haired servant, who silently retreated. He allowed himself to waver in his step before he felt he couldn't go any more, and leaned against the rough stone wall next to the entrance of the first large room. The temperature soothed his pain a little, but his body craved fluids and resting in his bed again. At least the soft smell of roses in the air reminded him of the comfort of last night. He heard the delighted voices of the visitors, but couldn't decipher a word of them, and the painfully quiet replies of the king. Maybe they were talking about their personal lives, or about Princess Alba and the future wedding. They probably did. The official engagement for sure made quick waves throughout the kingdom. Her being seen as the only good accomplishment by the king, being promised to a family of great power, was like a fresh ray of sunlight, especially because the two engaged people seemed genuinely fond of each other. After the catastrophes of the last generation, it seemed like a good start. Still, there were the people that opposed the reign of the future Queen Alba, not only because she was to be a woman who ruled, but also because she was not the legal daughter of the king. This concerned you as well, not because he had any strong opinions on the laws of marriage in Bota, but because of everything else. He never knew Alba's mother, of course, still he couldn't imagine there to be consent on her side. Then he remembered the gravestone, Ophelia Miller, who had died at only 17 years old. So that was where Dew had heard the last name of Avery's night acquaintance before. But before he could continue thinking, a strange noise caught his attention, and he looked through the open doors towards the source. Loud laughter, then choking and more choking, paired with the suffocating cries as other voices became active. All of the delightfulness had evaporated in seconds, and sheer panic could be heard. Dew's heart dropped. He tried to get up to his feet, but they didn't work as they were supposed to. He had to press himself upwards on the wall, attempting to use the support, without success. Footsteps were echoing, more cries but no more choking, barking voices. Soon Dew saw the reflection of dull light on metal right beside his eye, and then two guards seized him by the arms. He didn't struggle because he couldn't. His feet were dragged across the floor as he couldn't keep up the pace. Dew hung in between the two like an animal shortly after slaughter. His eyes refused to stay open, but he knew they went down, and it got cold. So cold. Without hesitation he was thrown onto the dirty stone ground, while a door of iron bars closed behind him, and he was imprisoned. Someone had died, again, and it was poison, again. Charles was innocent, and so was he, but who would believe him? Anyone that knew him would. It didn't count, though, as long as the culprit wouldn't reveal themselves before the king and his advisers in person. Those thoughts collected in his mind, wanting to form a clear picture, an emotion, a reaction, anything. Yet all he could do was sink further into a state of semi-consciousness. Dew walked, or crawled, he didn't remember, into a corner of the small cell. He was alone. Only 1 to 3 guards patrolled up and down the corridor, their heavy step never stopping for long. It was as if they had their own immortal heartbeat. Grey light fell through the small barred window on the top back of the prison cell wall. He considered if he should try talking to the guards. He knew he didn't do it. Not even a slight slip-up on his side could have caused the death of someone. But he didn't talk. What were they supposed to do? All they knew was request and execution, and their own judgment should be kept to themselves. Dew assumed the trial to be held the next day, presumably against his favor. Still, he hoped there was a glimpse of common sense in the king. Maybe he would find it strange, and not justify it by nothing more than revenge for Charles' death. Who exactly died he didn't know, just that it couldn't have been the princess or the king, but one of the visitors, because he was still alive. The next question he asked himself was who the true culprit wanted dead. Dew assumed that the actual victim of the assassination attempts were the king or his daughter, and that festivities were a good time to sneak poison, while everyone else was too stressed to notice. He couldn't picture who in his close cycle wanted their ruler dead. Diana could immediately be crossed out. His Majesty gave her all the stability she could wish for. The next one on the list was Frederick. He hated the king for his weak leadership and possibly what had led to the birth of Princess Alba. Still, Dew couldn't imagine that he would go as far as to kill him so a ruler to his taste could take the crown. Frederick was a man who could easily put his own desires away. A person who was partially involved during both the poison attacks was Sean's wife. You couldn't assess her behavior. Maybe she was fed up with all the work she had to do or something similar. In the end, it was possible for any servant with a key to have unlocked the cellar or the storage room where the ingredients were stored even before they were used, so the list could go on forever. He leaned his throbbing head against the cold stone and stared at the ceiling with half-open eyes. It was about 2.5 meters above him, and some of the bars were anchored onto it from below. They were rusty and dented, and he believed he could see a tiny piece of ripped cloth tightly knotted to one of them. A way out. Dew didn't seriously consider doing it. He stayed true to his word, and even if he felt bad, and even if he felt hopeless, alone in the cell with a death trial awaiting him the next day, he would not just die before his time. The day was cold already, but the night was colder. He untied his apron and tried to use it as a blanket, at least for his torso. The stone had absorbed a tiny bit of his heat, so the wall was a little less freezing as long as he stayed perfectly in place. Once again he noticed how spoiled he had become in the time he lived in the castle. A warm, soft bed, mostly warm food, and people who didn't want to kill him most of the time was what he expected to experience every day, and even if he wasn't, at least there was a person who could make up for that. A torch burned on the opposite wall. A different guard now patrolled the corridor. Dew could hear distant pain moan to his left. In truth, he wasn't alone imprisoned. Whether that was supposed to be comfort to him or not, he couldn't tell. Somehow he managed to sleep after all the aching in his head and the sweating had ceased. It wasn't a good sleep. He woke up several times, disoriented, cold and in pain through the unnatural position he was in. His dream world wasn't any better, as he found himself lying in a cave underwater, anxiously lurking out of the entrance to look at the surface, where a boat was driving in circles while dragging a net filled with something large and dark behind itself. Another guard shift took place when he woke up next, and he guessed that it could be morning. Usually Avery took one of those shifts if nothing else could be chosen for him to do. He began to wonder how he would react if he came back in 28 days, and the room was empty and his body long being burned to ash. But then he banished those thoughts from his head. He didn't want to imagine it, and even less did he want it to become reality. Only then did he fully realize that this could be his last morning, and all he could do was sit in a corner and nothing else. The door was locked, the bars too tight, the window too small, and the walls and ground too hard. Dew tightened his fist around the pitiful apron. He had no weapon on him, not the kitchen knife or the one Avery carried with him, not even a little hairpin he could use to open the lock with, which he practically could, but couldn't do at the same time, because there was a guard outside who wouldn't hesitate to hack off his fingers if he even hinted at trying anything of sorts. Dew lifted the apron over his head and face and pulled it down as if he could hide himself. Would it be a rope, or a sword, or a cage for starvation, and would it be public or not? He pressed his hands against his ears as if he could block out his thoughts this way. He didn't want to die. He wanted to leave the castle and find Avery's brother and walk through the forest, maybe alone or maybe not, until his natural end of days. It couldn't be much more painful than the missing chunk on his upper thigh, right? Or the hook in his lip tearing through his flesh over his cheek and almost into his eye. Or could it? The door swung open, and 2 fully armed men pulled him up by his arm and dragged his feet across the floor like the day before. He was too stunned to move or even blink. They went upstairs into a hallway where the ground was covered by smooth wood. Finally a bit of warmth touched his body. Then there was a great door which was open, and the light of the sunrise through the mosaic window of a starflower blinded him so much he lost vision for a short time. As it returned, he had already been chained to the ground in the center of the long room with high ceiling. Left and right stood 3 rows of chairs, each higher than the other, but almost fully empty. Underneath the colorful window was a pedestal, where in the middle stood something like a throne, and next to it 1 decorated chair each. In the shadows on the thrones you could barely make out the silhouettes of the king, Princess Alba, and another man he didn't recognize. The claim was brought. He killed the sister of the nobleman's wife by serving a plate of poisoned seafood. She had choked to death on her own vomit while sweat stood on her skin. No questions asked. The nobleman and his company demanded a death sentence and a generous payment from the king. Duke could only stare at the ground, his whole body numb and unmoving. The octopi. They had made him sick as well. The lid wasn't placed because someone had come in and put poison into the box, but he wasn't allowed to speak. As he tried to open his mouth, a foot landed on the back of his skull and pressed him into the floor, which made his head spin. So he kept his mouth shut and waited for the king's final judgment. It was quiet. He was probably thinking of the method. Then a voice rose, but it wasn't the king's. "Consider this, Papa." He heard the voice of a girl speak softly but anxiously. "It was the second time and the same method, but the last boy died and couldn't have done it. There might be another person involved. Wouldn't prison suffice until there is proof against the pale boy?" Dew was alerted. Should there really be a chance he could live to see the next day? There was more silence. His heart raced. The king was considering it. Maybe he was considering letting the kitchen boy live. Maybe his daughter's words had changed his mind once again. Then he announced his final verdict.